entrepreneurs of the world. My name is Glenn Turansky. I am a member of the advisory board at One Business World, the platform that hosts leading entrepreneurs of the world. Leading Entrepreneurs of the World is one of the most comprehensive global entrepreneurial platforms and features entrepreneurs, founders, and business leaders presenting on cutting-edge topics and the latest in industry developments. Our goal is to provide the global business and entrepreneurial communities with a window into the minds of those shaping the future of our world. Today, we're very happy to welcome leading global entrepreneur, investor, and author, Richard Steele. Richard is an entrepreneur, an investor, and a consultant who has run private and public companies, served on nonprofit boards, and has advised the White House Business Council. Richard is the CEO of Parsec Ventures, a firm investing in early stage, innovative technology businesses and exceptional entrepreneurial leaders. He is an advisor to large and mid-sized companies, governments, startups, and not-for-profits. Among his various roles and activities, Richard is also on the Alumni Board of the Harvard Business School. Rich, it's great to have you here with us today. We look forward to hearing more about elevated economics and the future of consumer and investor behavior. So let me hand it off to you, and then I'll be back with you on the back end here of our webcast today.
Thank you so much, Glenn. I appreciate the introduction. I don't think you left one stone unturned in that intro, so thanks very much for that. Well, let's get right to it. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. You covered most of this in the intro, but I do a lot of work on corporate leadership and the future of consumer and investor behavior, as you mentioned, as well as ESG and sustainability and purpose-driven businesses. And I write for Forbes, and my work's been covered by a lot of these folks that you see here at the bottom of the screen. The book that you mentioned is called Elevated Economics, and it did win Book of the Year in economics, and it says here finalist for Book of the Year, but actually also won that award for Book of the Year, the silver medal in Forward Reviews, and then the gold medal for Activism. So very well received. I was definitely not expecting any of that, and I was very happy that the book was so well received. And just here's a few folks that say some nice things about the book as well, so you don't just have to take my word for it. But none of this is to impress anybody here listening, but it's more to impress upon you, I think, the importance of the ideas that are discussed in the book and the research that's in the book as well. So let's dive in. Let's talk about some of these things. So I wrote the book, Elevated Economics, because I was seeing this confluence of events happening. And I'll get to what those were in a second. But as an entrepreneur and a business owner and somebody who's run public companies and private companies and been on the boards of nonprofits and dealt with government and the White House, I have a lot of conversations with people at a fairly high level about what we're seeing in the economy, what's around the next bend, what's around the next curve. And that old Wayne Gretzky quote about skating to where the puck is going, not to where it is, comes to mind. In most of those conversations, that's a topic of conversations. What's happening next? Where are things going? How do I position my company, my firm, for what's next? And so, as I was talking with folks in government and the private sector, and in the nonprofit sector as well, we really were trying to uncover where is investor behavior going, where's consumer behavior going, and what is this confluence of events that we're in? Where does that take us? Where's that going to lead us? And this confluence of events, of course, climate change is in the headlines every day. Racial injustice issues are top of mind. Diversity and inclusion, also top of mind for a lot of companies. Changing and increasing regulation is on top of mind for a lot of folks, as well as even things as pedantic as new accounting standards that are coming into place. And then all this with the backdrop of changing investing and consumption habits of the next generation and the accessibility of information that everybody has, really makes for quite a potent cocktail. And the reason I call this a confluence of events is that the term confluence is used in when two rivers meet, but it's only used if the rivers are of a similar size. And I think that confluence is the right word here, because all these issues that you see here on the screen, these are big, meaty issues. These are similarly sized events, all very, very important, and they're all happening at the same time. So as I was researching the book, this was a headline in the New York Times: shareholder value is no longer everything, top CEOs say. So I saw this and I thought, wow, this is kind of goes against what we're taught in business school. And who are all these, left-wing, CEOs that are saying that shareholder value isn't everything. And this is what was drummed into our heads in business school. And well, it turns out the people that are saying this are Brian Moynihan, right? Who's the CEO of Bank of America, and Jeff Bezos from Amazon, and Mary Barra, and Tim Cook, and Robert Smith of This Equity Partners, and Larry Fink, et cetera, right? So, okay, it's these 7 people, but it's also 133 others that join them. So 140 CEOs of America's biggest companies got together and rewrote the rules, the purpose of a corporation. Those 140 CEOs are the people that comprise the Business Roundtable. And this is the CEOs of Johnson and Johnson, and all the biggest companies in the United States. So here's what they said is the new purpose of a corporation, in order, by the way: delivering value to customers, right? Fair enough. Investing in our employees, including training and education and upskilling. Number 3, dealing fairly and ethically with our suppliers. Number 4, supporting the communities in which we work. And they talk about protecting the environment and embracing sustainable practices. And the 5th, in order, the very last, was generating long-term value for shareholders. Long-term value, not short-term value for shareholders. So this was the new statement on the purpose of a corporation, as agreed to by 40 CEOs of America's largest companies. So that takes us into this term that we've all heard, ESG. More and more and more, we're going to hear about ESG, and we've heard about ESG. ES&G, environmental, social, and governance. You can see what those various areas are comprised of with these bullet points on the bottom of the screen here. The E is the easiest one to understand. So the environmental, it's easiest to wrap our hands around that. What are your air emissions and your energy use and conservation, and how do you manage natural resources and waste management, things like that. On the social side, it's a little bit more esoteric. Our local community impact, right? Production quality, safety standards, things like that. And of course, labor standards and employee relations. But then on the governance side, this is, I think, where it gets the most murky, which, and these are issues of, how a business does business. What are their business practices? Are they ethical? What sort of power does the board have? And are they truly independent, the board members? Are they a diverse group of people? What do voting rights look like? Things like that. What's the transparency of the business? So ESG are these 3 elements, and ESG is becoming more and more important across almost every single industry. In fact, I had a colleague of mine who runs a very, very large construction company, and they had contracted with a firm to build a new campus. It was a pretty huge project. And they had to write an essay on their firm's stance on ESG. They were told later, after they won the contract, that the reason that they won the contract was specifically because of their stance on ESG. So just one quick real world example. So when we talk about how much of a trend this is and how irreversible of a trend this is, look at some of these headlines, right? The next decade of investing will be defined by ESG. BlackRock's Larry Fink, who we saw in that image a couple of slides ago, said that this is a tectonic shift, and investors are shifting to ESG focused firms, and they've built their whole business at BlackRock around ESG and sustainability, specifically with some of their iShares products as well as others. You see some of these other headlines as well, but the ESG is really here to stay. Walmart went so far, this is now 2 years ago, went so far as to announce that they will become a regenerative company, right? So I'm sorry, it's about a year and 3 months ago. Regenerating meaning they're going to protect, manage, or restore 50 million acres of land, 1 million square miles of ocean, not just be net zero, which they're also going to do. And they're going to get to net zero, by the way, without just sort of the easy way, which is buying carbon offsets, right? Buying credits. They're going to do the hard work and really get to net zero in a really organic way. Pardon the use of the term there. And you see that, GM's phasing out gas powered vehicles by 2035. In California, you won't be able to buy a internal combustion engine car in 2035. Same thing in New York. If you're buying a new car, it will be an electric car, period, end of story. You see some of these other headlines, right? Biden saying that he's going to quadruple climate aid to poor countries. We want to get, in the United States, 45% of our energy from renewable sources. There is a movement to keep oil and gas in the ground, so no more extraction activities whatsoever. Salesforce reaching net zero energy uses, and they also said that they have a product called the Sustainability Cloud. They're making that product free to anybody who wants it. To that point earlier about what the scientists are saying is that, yeah, to avoid the worst of climate change, they're now saying don't extract fossil fuels, full stop, at all. Really, really compelling, interesting development. This is just a couple of weeks ago. So there are companies that have pledged net zero, of course, on the emissions side, but now you see banks and insurance companies taking action as well. So insurance companies getting pressure to refuse insurance to extraction companies, think mining or oil exploration and extraction. And then you've got banks pledging net zero finance emissions as well. So they will not finance projects. This is a new development. They will not finance projects that are involved in extraction activities. So you think about that. If you think about the consequences of what that means, the cost of capital is going to go up, right, to finance these projects, which makes the ROI on these a little bit lower, right? You had Greenland, I think it was about 5 days ago, end of December, announced that they're not going to allow any oil exploration whatsoever in Greenland or in the waters, their territorial waters off of Greenland. I mean, so you see where this is going. It's not a trend, and it's not a fad. It's definitely here to stay. So one of the other things to keep in mind is the UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. So the United Nations put out these 17 numbered and color-coded goals for, by the way, this was adopted by all 193 member nations. So these goals are basically saying, how can we move forward as a planet, right, as a global society? Here are the goals that we have. And a lot of firms, actually, let me pause for a second. When I typically do a presentation like this in the United States, we typically do a hand raise, and about 25% of the people have heard of the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs from the UN. When I do this presentation internationally, it's the opposite. It's about 75%, if not higher, are familiar with the SDGs. So a lot of companies, firms, will pick from these 17 the areas in which they have impact, right? So a software firm is not necessarily going to have a lot of let's say affordable and clean energy issues that aren't easily addressed. Whereas a construction firm is squarely in SDG number 11, sustainable cities and communities, right? So you pick where you have impact and in which area you operate, and you can map your plan, your strategic plan, your plan for ESG issues and sustainability issues against these goals, or against a few of these goals, the ones that matter most to your firm. So something else to keep in mind. It's really interesting too, because you'll see that there is pressure from investors and shareholders and the community writ large, customers, but there's also regulatory risk and regulatory pressure. So China vowed to become carbon neutral in 2060. The Fed said here in the US that climate change poses a sustainability risk. They said that for the first time at the end of 2020. We talked about California and now New York ordering the phase out of gas-powered cars. In San Francisco, you actually can't build a new unit of housing with gas line. So no more gas cooking, gas ranges, gas stovetops, gas heaters, everything's electric, including water heaters. So you've got in these numbers here on the left-hand side, 823 cities, 101 regions have net zero targets already. And when you add those up, they represent more than 846 million people, right? And these are, these are stats as of a few years ago. In 2019, about 500 companies pledged net zero targets. And in 2020, it was 1,500. 2021 saw that number increase. So as we see, right, market demand is reshaping behavior at the corporate level. And it's the speed of those changes that's really noticeable. If you look at the changes that resulted from the Black Lives Matter movement in the summer of 2020, and now we're getting into the S, right, of ESG, you see some of these headlines, right? Citi pledged to become an anti-racist company and review their internal policies. Really interesting. Citigroup study found that 16 trillion was lost in the U.S. economy as a result of racism. And then CEOs pledging 1 million jobs for Black Americans, the 110 initiative. On the gender parity side, you've got this seemingly good headline from CNN. It says female Fortune 500 CEOs reach an all-time high, right? But it's still a small percentage, is sort of the byline there. It's 7.5%. 7.5%, so a pretty dismal statistic there. But you've got California with their SB 826, their Senate Bill 826, rolling out diversity quotas for corporate boards if you're domiciled in the state of California. And NASDAQ, right? NASDAQ has this rule that you've got to have at least one woman and one person who identifies as either an unrepresented minority or LGBTQ plus on the board. So you're seeing that this change happen on the societal level as well as on the regulatory level, as well as from institutions themselves. You really know that it's getting serious when the accountants get involved, right? So all of the big four corporate accounting firms have gotten together and said, hey, we're going to endorse official ESG reporting standards. And that's, I think, when you really know that things are getting serious. All right, so look at the inflows. We're gonna change now to talk about investors a little bit more. You look at the inflows for sustainable investing assets, right? Reached $17 trillion, and ESG mandated assets could make up 50%. 50%. Today, it's one of every $3 of professionally managed assets in the United States have an ESG mandate. 50% by 2025. 50%, and here we are in 2022. So short time, it's going to be about half of all professionally managed assets are going to have an ESG mandate. So a lot of people will say, well, look, I don't want to trade all this, my financial return for this tree hugger nonsense, right? You hear that argument sometimes. Well, here's the good news. You can invest sustainably without sacrificing financial returns, period. Not question mark, as you see in the top line here, but period. And this is a result of research performed on 11,000 mutual funds that shows that there's no financial trade-off. That's Morgan Stanley. Barron's found the same thing. In fact, the S&P was up 31.5% versus the Barron's Most Sustainable Companies Index, which returned 34.3% last year. And then also Morningstar found that not only do sustainable funds perform better, but they have lower downside risk too. So an added benefit there. Okay, so a strong ESG proposition does link to value creation in these 5 ways: top line growth, cost reduction, almost everything we talked about in the very beginning. Energy use, wastewater, recycling, regulatory intervention, all those things are cost savings, right? And when it talks here about regulatory and legal interventions, you can earn subsidies, right, and government support for operating in a green way, but you have also the added benefit of being ahead of regulation rather than catching up to it, being a leader in your field versus being a reluctant follower. Productivity uplift as well. So we'll talk about purpose-driven businesses in a second here, but ESG is a very turnkey, low-hanging fruit kind of a way, if it's done correctly, if it's done with integrity, to boost productivity and to boost employee retention and to attract talent, right, through greater social credibility, as it says here. And then the fifth way, of course, that ESG, a good solid and strong ESG proposition links to value creation is optimization of assets, right? So don't be afraid of ESG. ESG is here to stay. And if you position yourself well, you can do very well in what's coming. What's coming is a 68 trillion. I'm going to pause there. I'm going to say that again. 68 trillion with a T of wealth is being transferred from baby boomers and older generations to Gen Z and younger generations. That's a huge amount of money. It's a huge amount of money. It represents tens of millions of US households transferring their wealth. And the inheritors of that wealth, 80% of them will look for a new financial advisor after inheriting their parents' wealth. And that generation invests and consumes totally differently than does the previous generation. So among individual investors, 86% of millennials say that they're interested in sustainable investing. 75% of all investors, 86% of millennials. 71% believe that companies with leading sustainability practices may be better long-term investments. That dovetails with the Barron's research that we saw a moment ago. 80% are interested in sustainable investments that can be customized, tailored, right, to meet their goals. That's a trend we see across all industries, both services and products, right? That's sort of high level of customization that we're seeing. So why should it be any different from financial services? Great professor at HBS and a wonderful human being. This guy, Vikram Gandhi, has done some great research and found that only 22% of boomers express an interest in impact investing. And for Gen X, it's 31%, and then millennials, 71%. So that curve is just, I mean, it's just up and to the right. That line is just up and to the right as the generations go down. So let's talk about millennials for a second. These are the folks who are willing to pay extra for sustainable products. In business school, we learned about that willing to pay curve, right? So as a business owner, as somebody who is a leader in your field, or somebody who even aspires to be in a leadership position in the firm, this is profit-making territory here, right? These are folks who are willing to pay more for sustainability products. These are the folks, millennials, who check packaging more than any other generation to ensure a positive social environmental impact message. And they prefer to work for a sustainable company. We are going to get to purpose-driven businesses in a second. I love this stat. This is so interesting. Okay, so millennials. Right, so do you agree with this statement? It is extremely or very important for me that companies implement programs to improve the environment. 83% of millennials agree with that statement. Extremely or very important to me that companies implement programs to improve the environment. And then you see the numbers for boomers and Gen X. From a corporate reporting standpoint, 2013 and before, 20% of the S&P disclosed their ESG information. Present day, 85%. So again, if any of you are still listening to this thinking this is a trend or a fad or it's going to go away, or you can put your head in the sand, forget about it. Let me disabuse you of that notion, because it is absolutely not true. Especially on the consumer side, anybody can look up any stock and you see, right, the statistics and historical data and the profile and financials and the charts and all the rest of it. But what else do you see? You also see sustainability, right? There's a sustainability metric right there. You click on that, you see their environmental score, their social risk score, and their governance risk score, E, S, and G, all there for everybody to see. It's in everybody's pocket at this very moment. So if you're a public company, and I've run public companies in the past, this is something you need to be thinking about. Let's double click on that, both figuratively and literally. Once you start researching, sites like this make it very, very, very easy to see what sort of products and activities is this firm that I might be considering investing in involved in. Gambling, tobacco, porn, fur, military stuff, right? Do they have good Catholic values, if that's important to you? Right? Are they involved in pesticides? Right? So the ubiquity and availability of information is like it has been never before. And so ESG scores and data are right there at everybody's fingertips. So now that we know all this, who wins, right? Who wins in the elevated economy? That's the question. My argument is that purpose-driven businesses are the ones that win. We all know the 4 P's of marketing, right? Product, price, place, and promotion. We get that. But there is a 5th P, and that 5th P is purpose. And purpose-driven businesses attract better talent, retain talent better, and retain better talent. And with less turnover, that's a huge cost savings to the employer as well. The estimate, the rule of thumb is for executive level employees, it's 24 months of salary and that it costs to replace somebody. And for non-executives, it's about half that. So this Nelson report on sustainability was really, really interesting. And they basically said, look, change is happening fast, that we've just talked about in these last few slides. And the responses are really, really dramatic because of purpose, because this 5th P, this purpose, is really linked to issues of far greater importance than any of the other 4. And what I write about in the book is that people buy for purpose. And what that means is they're making buying decisions, these economic decisions, through these macro lenses rather than through micro considerations. What I mean by that is people's definition of self-interest has expanded to include not only just the self, but their community, their loved ones, the environment, society as a whole, right? It's changed. That's why we saw the research about millennials and checking the packaging and all that stuff, right? Preferring to work for a purpose-driven firm. And it's really alarming. I think that it's interesting to pause and look at the consequences if companies don't change. So Unilever, this is real money, spent €1 billion attempting to align their products with their customers' values. And they did that by finding ways to cut fossil fuels from their detergents. So that's number 1, real money. Employee activism, right, is another one. So you all can see this, but in response to climate inaction by their firms. So Amazon employees formed a group called Amazon Employees for Climate Justice, and they staged a walkout. And when they walked out, so did employees from Google, Microsoft, and Apple and Facebook. And a couple months later, Amazon pledged $2 billion to the climate crisis. Wayfair employees refused to work on the mattresses for the kids in cages, the government detention facility. Google employees have refused work on military projects and things like that. So the consequences of not changing are actually, fairly, if not very, significant. So I'll pause there. We'll end there. I want to say thank you to everybody who's here and who's watching. You feel free to connect with me. You can find out more about the book, etc., at that URL at the bottom if you're so inclined. And I just want to say thank you to Steele and also to Glenn for having me today. I hope that was helpful. There's a heck of a lot more in the book, but we'll leave it there. That's the condensed version for now.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. How long did you spend working on the book?
About 2 years.
About
2 years. Yeah, I did 15 rounds of edits, and so yeah, no, it was a long time, but it was just absolutely fascinating. And for a while there, in the early days, I didn't really know if I was onto something or not. I knew I was having all these conversations and this anecdotal evidence that these issues were going to be of paramount importance. But if you look at what's happened over the last couple of years in ESG and sustainability, I don't know if it was maybe dumb luck or timing or whatever, but I think the book came out at a really, really good time and has struck a chord.
Yeah, I've spent a good chunk of my career, at least on the G side.
Yeah.
As you called it, the murkier side of the 3, right? And that's always challenging. You talk about voting rights and the like, and shareholder proposals and the ability to offer them to the companies as part of the proxy season. It's interesting on the scoring side. I know when you get into that annual proxy season, the weight of places like ISS and Glass Lewis, they're actually scoring companies now on ESG as well. That's part of their review as they do their voting recommendations in the institutional investing world. So that's taken on a large importance for them. You mentioned the UN Sustainability, the SDG goals. I am familiar with those. A board member, colleague of mine, I'm on the King's College board. He's a member of the UN General Compact.
Okay.
So he sits on and does the drafting on some of these goals. And I remember him sharing these with me like 4 or 5 years ago. And I said, well, these are nice colors. What do they all
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
And watching from what was probably, as you kind of alluded to, a little bit obscure maybe 5 or 6 years ago, to have it now front and center is pretty impressive by way of impact, as you go forward with it. I early on, when I was with the New York Stock Exchange, I remember I got invited to participate on a panel. The integrated reporting people were kind of just starting on how to start doing sustainability matrix, and so they wanted to have some stock exchange representation. So I got to go. I was on the panel with a friend of mine from the Toronto Stock Exchange, and I remember saying the same thing to them. I said, "Well, I can cover the G part. I'm not all that familiar with E and S, but we'll give it a try, right?" As it plays, and to watch it become so prominent now, as you said, whether it's the investing generation, whether it's millennials or Generation Z here, moving forward, it certainly is front and center. I know Larry Fink's annual letter is probably one of the most, next to Warren Buffett's annual letter, probably one of the most read corporate communications probably in the world now, looking at those types of issues. And I remember when the Business Roundtable, all of a sudden they swapped out shareholder for stakeholder, and the world like paused.
Yep.
Right. It's like, what? How does that play out? Right.
Absolutely. No, I mean, that was a bombshell moment, August 19th of 1919. And that's, I refer to that in the book as the day the shareholders died, kind of a little bit tongue in cheek. But yeah, to move from shareholder centric views to stakeholder centric views is, I think, really a watershed moment. And of course, there are, like, everybody's, I always say it's easy to be a critic, right? It's if you've been an operator, you know how hard it is to be an operator and to keep all of your stakeholders happy, and how hard it is to sometimes draw that line in the sand and say, look, here's what we're going to do, here's what we stand for, and also here's what we stand against, right? Here's what we do. I had a business school professor who said, look, it's important to know what you'll do, but it's more important to know what you won't do. And I just thought that was such a great quote, a great quip. And looking at the way that consumers and investors are changing, these metrics are real. They're important. They're really important. They are real and really important to everybody. I mean, if we're all going to, live here on this planet for the foreseeable future, we really do have to start tackling these things. And I think there's been a blind eye turned toward a lot of these issues over the years, and it's very encouraging to see individual consumers realizing that they do have the power to change some of this. And I think that's really the optimistic side of this, because we've all had the power the whole time. We've always had that power. Every time you spend $1, this is not my quote, every time you spend $1, you're making a vote for the kind of world you want to live in. And I really believe that. And I think more now than ever, consumers are aware of that and making changes, but also you've got firms and leadership within firms saying, I'm in a position to make a difference, or I aspire to be in a position to make a difference. So I want to help my firm. I want to help my firm get there. We now know sort of, where the puck is going, to use that metaphor again. Let me help position my company to get in front of these changes. And it really is a sea change. I mean, you talk about the great wealth migration that we discussed a little bit ago. And it's not just the people that are going to be buying things and investing, but these are all going to be the same people that are running the companies, right? So I think that is a reason for optimism and a reason for hope in this world.
Absolutely. I mean, $68 trillion talks, right? That's not a rounding error. That's not great.
Absolutely.
Yeah, one of the challenges that I've seen following the issue now for a couple of years And it kind of goes to the reporting side. And you mentioned accountants, right? And you think of it for a public company, you think of the annual report, right, or the Form 10K. Getting that information, and obviously the SEC continues to put out guidance and invites comments on disclosures and things. But getting some of that core ESG information into the annual report is, I think, still a goal for regulatory organizations in general. Obviously, most companies now put out their own CSR report or sustainability report, and those are incredibly well done. I mean, I remember reading an oil and gas company sustainability report, and you couldn't even tell that they were an oil company, but when you were reading all the stuff that they did, and I've seen some fabulous disclosures from mining companies as well as to what they do with the communities they serve in and how they give back. But I think part of the challenge is, again, is to get some of that into those annual reports where investors would typically look and not have to go to that extra report. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, so it's my position that type of reporting will be required within the next 5 years. So right now it might be a nice to have, but it'll be table stakes within 5 years. And I spent a lot of time thinking about this and researching and talking to institutional investors and other big firms about this kind of thing. The George Serafin, professor at HBS, has a really fantastic series of work on impact-weighted accounts. So when you tally up the impact in real dollars of the operation that you're running and add that to your bottom line, the results can be dramatically different. So we talked about pre-2013, right? 15% of companies were disclosing their ESG status, and now it's 85%, soon to be 100. NASDAQ will probably be the first to require it. It's a foregone conclusion, and that's why I love having conversations like this, especially with CEOs in the private sector, because I feel as though I can really provide value, right? A little bit of a alarm clock kind of a thing, right? A wake up call, canary in the coal mine, if I can mix 3 metaphors in one sentence. But because it is encouraging, right, to see people really understand, okay, this is, not only are we doing this because it's the right thing to do, but we will be required to do it. Let's get in front of it. Let's help set the standards. Let's be at the table, not on the menu, as one of my negotiation professors so aptly put it a long time ago.
And it carries over even, and you mentioned as part of your own background, it carries over to the not-for-profit community as well. I mean, I sit on a number of not-for-profit boards, and we're assessing mission statements and value statements and D&I statements. We're convening employee task force to kind of, along with having board participation, which I think is a critical element from a buy-in standpoint.
Yep.
So we're seeing it even in the not-for-profit community, that mindset, that consciousness kind of flowing out along those lines as you look to an organization, and
well,
adding a fifth P, as you said, I think is incredible, right? The whole concept, you take your product, your price, and then you put one big purpose right across the center there. Yeah. Very, very, very impressive.
Oh, well, thank you. I know, I appreciate that. I just wanted to make a mention of something on the board side. Sometimes it is like, turning around that proverbial aircraft carrier, right? It takes a long time. It's difficult to do, but it's worth doing, and it's necessary. I was on a nonprofit board for 5 years up until just recently, and by my 5th year, I was the chair of that board. And for 4 out of those 5 years, I was working, knowing that I would be the chair at a certain time. I was working to get 50% of the board to be comprised of female representation, trying to get women on the board. And it took all of those 4 years to get to that. But I was very happy to say that by the time that I left, we had a chair for DEI, and we had 50% board representation comprised of women on that board. And I don't say that to impress anybody again, but just to impress upon you and everybody listening that it is long. It takes a long time. It is often thankless, but it is very much worth doing, because I believe that the outcomes that we're getting now, I mean, it's really interesting just in that one organization that we're able to attract and retain more women to that organization, because they see that we actually walk the walk and talk the talk. And look, to everybody, all these, middle-aged white guys like me out there that, that might be listening, I think it takes us to champion all of these issues and take them very, very seriously and walk that walk, and then eventually get out of the way in order for change to happen. I'll get off my soapbox, but that's just a quick aside.
Again, coming from the world of accounting, you look at who was populating university accounting majors, right? For the longest of times, it was men. That's changed. It's gone over the halfway point now with females. Same thing with the in the world of public accounting. You look at people who are now joining the workforce, becoming the future partners of these firms. Looking ahead, and it's people from diverse backgrounds, which is great, because at the end we're all kind of learning then from each other.
Yeah, and I think it's important too that not to fall into the trap of tokenism as well, right? So having a diverse board or a diverse workforce is not a matter of ticking a box, and we have to get, I think, a little bit past the thought diversity. That was sort of a buzzword that was used over the last few years, but we have to get sort of past that and really understand that, look, by bringing diversity, it really is an asset. It really is an asset. It's not a trope. It actually is an asset. If you have people on your board, as you know, Glenn, or operating in your exec team, and they're bringing perspectives that, again, 10 white guys around a conference table are not going to have from life experience, et cetera, that is a benefit, right? I mean, think about all through history, all these decisions that men have been making about women's products, right? Women's service companies, right? And all the mistakes that they've made over those years, and how much better, and I mean better in every way, how much more profitable firms would have been and will be going forward if they're getting diverse perspectives across the board, from frontline to management to exec to board level. I just think it's the opportunity is huge, and we're finally seeing it.
Well, you mentioned the aircraft carrier and kind of turning the Queen Mary in the harbor, and it's we're at that point though now, as you look at a lot of the director stats. If ever there was an opportunity, we're coming upon it now. As you look at the average age of the director class, and as they're getting older, and maybe companies have term limits or age limits around those boards, it's really a unique confluence, to use your term from earlier, of a chance to really revisit those boards and repopulate them, much in the same manner that you did on your organization there, to get people around the table, to have that kind of diverse viewpoint, different types of backgrounds. When you look at D&I as well, sometimes the D comes easier, and the I becomes, especially from an employee standpoint, the ultimate challenge. How do people feel included?
Yeah.
And that's often that's a challenge for organizations as well. And that runs the gamut from the top of the house, chairman of the board, CEO, all the way down through the organization, right?
Yeah. So I'm glad you said that about like the top of the house. One of the companies that Parsec is heavily invested in is a leadership company. So we actually teach leadership. There's two arms to this company. One is the racing arm, and one is the leadership arm. The racing arm, basically what we do is we attract the world's greatest outdoor endurance athletes and prepare a team to go and tackle some of the world's greatest outdoor adventures with the intent of setting a world record. So think, climbing up mountains, crossing deserts, rowing oceans, that sort of thing. And then we do that, which is it's incredibly fun business. I absolutely love it. And then we take the lessons that we've learned, we film everything, we make documentaries about it, et cetera, et cetera. And then we take the leadership lessons from the field and we go and teach leadership at business schools and in Fortune 1000 organizations. And what you just said about having it come from the top in a legitimate way with, you know, a genuine spirit and integrity is huge, right? It's absolutely everything. And it's funny. I think you maybe need a few gray hairs, but by that I mean just experience to really know that that's true, rather than just hearing somebody say it. But it really permeates the organization from the top down, and it's just it's so critically important. So I just wanted to underscore what you just said. I just completely agree.
It's interesting when you look at the concept of like impact investing. I remember, wow, this had to be, I bet you, at least 25 years ago, when I was in public accounting. I used to do a lot of healthcare work, right? So at one point I was working on the pension audit for the hospital. And I remember going into the CFO's office after looking at the investment portfolio, and I said, does the hospital have an investing policy as to where you're putting the assets? He goes, yeah, our policy is to make a lot of money. And also I'm looking, it's like, wow, you hold a lot of tobacco stocks.
Yeah.
In the portfolio. That seems a little, unless you're trying to like keep your pipeline going for patients, it seems counterintuitive, you know.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned tobacco. I've got two stories, one of which I can't share, but one of which I can, and that was this. So back to that professor who said, know what you'll say yes to, but also know what you'll say no to. And I'd made it very clear, my organization, before ESG was a thing, again, before sustainability, ESG, et cetera, purpose-driven business, before all this stuff was a capitalized term. I had said in very black and white terms, we're not going to make money from alcohol, tobacco, gambling, or porn. Like that, those are kind of our things. Alcohol in certain ways, but gambling, tobacco, and porn were off the table. And one of our salespeople came to me with a deal from R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company, and it was a big deal. We needed, at the time, we were a younger company. We needed the money. We needed the contract. He stood to make a huge commission on the sale, and it was both hard and easy. It was very easy to say no, because I know I didn't want to be successful with that kind of a client. I knew that I didn't want to personally, make money from my business with that kind of client. The heuristic I used was I don't want to take my kids on vacation with tobacco money. And on the other side, it was really, really hard because we needed the money and it was a huge contract, very profitable for us, et cetera. But we said no. Instantaneously, we said no, like we're not going to do it, much to the chagrin of the salesperson. But it was that kind of a decision that was really, really hard at the time that, again, without being on my soapbox, but it allows me to sleep well at night today. And that was 20 years ago. I think that with a mind towards legitimate, genuine, sort of ethical business practices that arise from this focus on ESG, sustainability, and purpose, that firms can be very successful, and people themselves can be very successful and proud of the work that they're doing to go and make some of these changes in the world.
Yeah, without a doubt. And you look at the investing community, whether it's BlackRock, State Street, they all come out with their investment guidelines. They're no longer considered really a passive investor, right? They're out pushing ahead on things that are important to them, as well as that's important to their stakeholders, their investors, right? The people that are entrusting their funds with them. Especially you look at some of the states too, whether it's Connecticut, New York, California, some of that employee pension money.
Look at the Harvard Endowment, New York Pension Fund, right? All exiting fossil fuels, in droves. So it's kind of, it's that whole, what if you had a war and nobody came thing, right? Like, I mean, if you fund it, if you don't fund it, what happens? We talked about banks pledging net zero financed emissions a while ago, right? And you talk about the cost of capital going up and ROI going down on those projects, and your IRR all of a sudden looks, maybe 1, 2, 3 points worse, and so you pursue a different avenue, right, as you're making those internal decisions. So yeah, no, it's really gaining a foothold now. I can't wait to, Glenn, have this conversation 5 years from now, right, and kind of look back and laugh at how naive we were on this call, right? I mean, I think all these things are absolutely without any question gonna happen, and gonna happen probably quicker than any of us think.
Just to maybe wrap up, just to go back to the SDGs again, some of those goals, I mean, they're big time worldwide goals. I mean, poverty.
Oh yeah, eradicating poverty, right? I mean,
hunger.
That's a pretty big goal.
We're not kidding around here when you think of big picture items that eventually work their way all the way through companies and through the investment cycle. Well, listen, Richard, this has been fascinating. The book is where is it? There,
Elevated Economics. There you go. Let's say it together.
Elevated. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you if they want to reach out?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest. I don't have any other social media other than LinkedIn. The website for the book is elevatedeconomics.org. It's available at Barnes & Noble, local bookstore, Porchlight, Hudson Booksellers, Amazon, whatever, wherever you get a book, you can get my book.
Fantastic. This has been incredibly fascinating, very informative, and enjoyable. You're obviously an expert here in the space, entrepreneurial spirit and all, and thank you for joining us today. Look forward to staying connected as we go forward, and best of luck with the book. And it's a great topic, and you're doing some really outstanding work in the area. So thanks for joining us today, and we wish you the best of luck going forward. Okay. Well, Glenn, look, coming from you, that I really do appreciate that. I mean, you're a very accomplished guy. So I take that with a lot of humility, and I thank you very much, and thanks for having me on. I hope we didn't bore everybody to tears, but it was great to be with you. Thanks again. All right. Look forward to seeing you next time. Take good care. Okay. Bye. Bye.